Hi. Should I start? Dear ears, cup your hands behind your ears to make them larger. Just lift them up, place them behind, as if you had the ears of a deer. Then think of a deer walking slowly, alert for the subtle sounds of the forest around you. Turn your dear ears to amplify your listening. Thank you, Jason Allen-Paisant. Thank you.
Crossing the threshold. I'm walking. I'm not going. My body moves along the way with patience for the breeze. The morning pallor lies on the green, the ravens stand on the light, and the expanse opens to my feet. High pitch and stitching sound of the jackdaws, a bedding of brown leaves covering the hummus, and in the middle is a stream that can hardly be heard. I come up from the round water with shadows I did not know. I can smell spring rising from the soft hollow. The stream hides things under its mirror, whispers, growths, blood, skin coming to cover the body. It flows more heavily in a black bed, leaves banana ground, the crack where home runs, where yam vines settle on a silent river, through a hill of steep bones singing from all sides, through the woodland. I hear damhead, cow pastures and tomato beds more loudly over brown leaves so alive, so alive. The ground is a black dress falling on a bed of pure manure. Green shoots are out, the ivy floor gives off murmured laughs, and a bird shoots through the tangled thoroughfare. What does the stream in Coffee Grove feel as it grows near? Going deeper now into the intimate recesses of the trunk, into the zones hidden from view but working to keep me alive, my eye looking at me from everywhere and making noises, the forest refusing to quiet its walking, eyes of the hillside in black soil, sounds in the redness of barks, the dangling of the branches in the brain of the stream. Faceless tree whose eyes dip into muddy tracks, I have space for you in my blood. Within you shines a flame traveling under your dress, the sap flowing. In your inner dark are the words I want, the words of a classroom of trees. 3 teenagers are younging their lives on the crest of the hill. Highlights of orange spill down on their laughs. The sunset with a trail of jet smoke over the clearing. A black man comes through a thicket with his baby, gives the head tilt. Yeah, bro. Seeing me, see him. Here in the woods, the darkness encloses just right. I go towards the tangled arch not far away. My volumes enter a cell. In it, I hear the sound of protoplasm bursting, the green grass coming back at my feet as I walk. But what are these woods anyway? I do not always understand what changes inside my head when the muscle boys with pit bulls and knives appear. If the city is so hostile, then why would we come here, where nobody would find us if we were mauled? If we lay bleeding, a densely covered tree would hide us. In here, history keeps following me around. So to be in these woods is not your idea of being free, but you will keep on seeing me. A sprout of grass in a roof's crevice blooms into a pack of dogs. Beware of spring. Believe you are a sprout of grass and love all you see, but come out of the woods before the white boys with pit bulls come. The barks in winter solid brown today are tinted green and hyacinth. The light darts with the quickness of the word bird.
Thank you so much, Jason.
Yes, thank you, Jason. Welcome everybody, and thank you all for coming this evening to the second field fairing event with Kind and Kind. We'll be spending this evening with Dr. Jason Allen-Paisant, who you just heard reading Crossing the Threshold, and who Kind and Kind will introduce. I'm Persephone Pearl. I'm a co-director at ONCA, which is an arts and environment charity and gallery in Brighton, England. My pronouns are she and her. I'm just going to look at myself. I'm a white woman in my 40s. I've got short brown hair. I'm sitting in my office with a plain background and a little picture of birds behind me. I'm just here. I'm just going to help with screen sharing to make for accessibility. So we'll see some of the words of the poems as the evening goes on. The conversation will run for about an hour, and then there'll be about 10 minutes at the end for questions. So I'll just introduce Kind and Kind, otherwise known as Kay Syrad and Claire Whistler. They've been working together as Kind and Kind since 2018. I've known them in that capacity since they led a series of eco-poetry workshops at ONCA called Changing Everything Carefully. They also taught these workshops at the Rewilded Estate NEP Wildland and at Aldeburgh Poetry Festival. Their collaborative poems have been published in Magma and Finished Creatures, and their chapbook and their anthologies of participants' work and Think Thing, their hybrid essay, poem and interview, they're all published by Elephant Press. And I'm delighted that ONCA's collaboration with these ever curious, inventive and passionate artists continues with the Field Fairing online event series. And I'm really excited to be here at this evening's conversation with Jason. So I'll hand over now to Kay.
Thanks very much, Persephone. Thank you. So I'm Kay Syrad. I'm a white woman in later age. I'm wearing a blue top and I have fair hair and glasses, and I'm sitting in front of a bookcase, like most people. And Claire?
I'm Claire Whistler, and I'm over 60, and I'm sitting in my conservatory. So hopefully I thought it would be quite nice to have the trees in the background for this particular event, thinking with trees and all sorts of things about trees with Jason. And I have long dark hair and I've got glasses on, and I'm she and her.
Thank you. I'm she and her too. So Kind and Kind, we're a composite eco-poet, as we've already heard. So the Field Fairing series is designed to investigate and celebrate diverse views and thinking about ways of making eco-poetry. Now, our first beautiful reading and discussion in the series was with poet Mary Joy Williams, who was talking about her poetic study of the Wellesbourne Underground River, of which there is now a video recording, which I think Persephone will put on a link at the bottom later. And in this second event, we're proud to present Jason Allen-Paisant, who you've just heard reading most beautifully, Crossing the Threshold. Before we formally introduce you, Jason, we'd like to say something about how we've been thinking about what eco-poetry is or can be, and not only drawing attention to ecological degradation and climate change, but also considering how to relate ethically to the non-human, how to respect the complex processes and intelligence of plants and animals. But we're increasingly aware of the colonial roots of extractivism, and those attempts to realign our relationship with the non-human must be based in social justice, in a recognition of the fact that access to the natural world is historied and unequal, and that all this wrong taking, as you might call it, is not only from the earth, but from particular humans, from particular people. So we're absolutely delighted to introduce Dr. Jason Allen-Paisant. Thank you so much for being here tonight, Jason. It's one of many events to celebrate the launch of your book, Thinking with Trees, your new collection. So we're lucky to have you. Jason is a lecturer in Caribbean poetry and decolonial thought, and also the director of the Institute for Colonial and Postcolonial Studies at the University of Leeds. His creative work includes memoir and critical life writing, as well as poetry, in which he addresses issues of time and space, class, race, and the environmental conditions that underpin Black identity. So his first collection, which he's just read from, is Thinking with Trees. It's published by Carcanet Press, and it's just become available in the last few days. So as Jason has argued, also in a fascinating essay in PN Review recently, one of the deep losses of in the process of colonisation is that of local knowledge practices, and with that the sense of belonging to the land and its spirits. The land becomes de-animated, no longer alive to its present occupants. And in white-dominated land, what's been called the Black outdoors becomes dangerous, threatened, in ways that are barely imagined in white thinking about walking in a forest or on the hills. And that loss of connection with the land, in Jason's understanding, has damaged colonized people's relation to time itself. But for Jason, it's poetry that can return a sense of deep time. He says poetry is a reclamation of time, of connection rather than reaction. And this is because poetry is an embodied practice, a different mode of knowing, or as Jason puts it, it embodies living philosophies. And I think we could see that in Crossing the Threshold, in which there's so much beauty and subtlety, and also philosophy, or philosophies about living. And I was thinking in the poem, my eye looking at me from everywhere and making noises, the forest refusing to quiet its walking. Eyes of the hillside in black soil, sounds in the redness of barks, the dangling of branches in the brain of the stream. Faceless tree whose eyes dip into muddy tracks. I have space for you in my blood. So Jason's going to read some poems soon, but I just want to follow up with this idea of embodied practice, and it's something that's very important to Kind and Kind, to work with poetry as in the most embodied way we can. And Claire is going to talk a little bit about that. So over to you, Claire.
Yes, just a little bit about the way we work and how we deliver our writing workshops. Something about the object body connective and everything being five-sensical, just in an embodied way. It's all I have to bring today. This and my heart beside. This and my heart and all the fields and all the meadows wide. Be sure to count should I forget? Someone the sun could tell, this and my heart and all the bees which in the clover dwell. That's a little Emily Dickinson in there, which I know Jason has in his foreground, background, as probably all of us listening might do. But it's just, I have to say, I can't remember poems unless I move at the same time. But Kay is now going to talk about trees. So we're going further into the trees.
And you're going to read Heartwood after that, Claire?
Yeah.
Yes. So the only thing I wanted to say about trees is, you know, we're thinking differently about trees now because there has been this scientific development regarding the way that trees communicate with each other through fungi, through vast networks of mycelium, and they protect each other and support each other. And some trees need other trees, you know, fir trees need birch trees, and monocultures of plantations can't work. And we know so much now that it's adding to our ecological thinking and where we stand, and ideas about animism and animacy and so on. But over to Claire for a quick poem, and then talk more about that.
Yes, it's been fascinating for me to read Jason's poetry, because I come from a different aspect of looking at trees. I also deliver forest bathing, Shinrin Yoku, Japanese ways of being in the forest. It's called forest bathing, but really it just means opening yourself up in a different way in the forest. It's a whole kind of all the different ways that trees are there. But while I was thinking about this, I got out my bag of all my notebooks about trees, which I keep for that occasion. And I found this poem that I wrote about 9 years ago on a residency in the Stour Valley in Kent, which is a forest. It's a forest residency. And I was learning things about trees, and I learned this thing about the heartwood. And here's my little piece about heartwood in a tree. So that's heartwood. Every broken limb, root, deep wound from fire, insect, falling timber, may open a way to decay. Heartwood, dark, radical pith, forms spontaneously. Once heartwood is complete, heartwood is dead, though some uncertainty exists. Heartwood looks no different. It may, or maybe not, be much darker than living wood. It may, or maybe not, be distinct from sapwood. The inner heartwood of old trees remains sound after hundreds and thousands of years. A tree can thrive with its heart decayed. And I found this poem, and in some way for me, Jason, it related in some way. And so I wanted to ask you, you know, I grew up in trees in the country, and I know you grew up in trees in the country, but I would love to ask you about your growing up in trees.
Yes. I grew up in a small district, as we call them, in Manchester, Jamaica. It's a hilly district with lots of yam planting. That's the main thing that farmers cultivate in that area. And my grandparents were yam farmers, and it was generally a very densely green area, but more so when we went down to my grandmother's cultivation plot, which involved going through lots of woodland and, you know, deep into the woodland to a clearing where you had the yam ground, as we call it, which is interesting now that I think about it. The yam ground, or in Jamaican, the yam ground, which is our language, our patois, yam ground. And I I would watch what was happening. I never planted yams myself as a child, but I watched and I was around and I played and so on while the grown folks did that. One of my duties was to mind the goats that my grandparents had. So I carried the goats to pasture and brought them in. So up until the age of 5, I lived entirely there in that area. And then I went to live with my mother at age 5 in the rural town, which is an expression I heard the other day, the semi-rural town nearby. But I still continued to spend the holidays, all of my holidays in that hillside district. So all of that means that I was constantly interacting. The trees were all around. They were just all around, and it was a farming district, and everybody, or not everybody, of course, but most families farmed, and so I get feelings when I hear certain names: logwood, cedar, lignum vitae. These things bring back the space to me. It really was a rustic neighborhood that didn't have electricity or running water. It was that kind of place, which is different from a lot of other places in Jamaica. But Jamaica has many such places, like my hillside district of Coffee Grove. And so I remember that. Yes, that's how that's how the space was. It still very much is when I go back there, except that now they have electricity and they still use their tanks for water. We cut down trees as well. We cut trees, right? We weren't animists. In fact, my grandparents, as well as a lot of the other people, went to the Church of God, which is a kind of some cross between. These are churches that broke away from established, more Protestant denominations, and there were small, folksy churches that played a lot of music, but people, as I said in my essay, were functional in how they viewed the land, and they were farmers after all. But there was it was sustainable, the way in which they lived, and they actually lived in community. So I know what it's like to go with my grandparents to what they call free labor, which was days in which you went to work on somebody's house to help them fix it or do something because it was their turn. And they would come and work for you at the next free labor. I've experienced that sort of thing. Is my answer too long?
No, I like your answer, and I'm wondering about, you had your absolute, that's what you grew up in. I grew up in the way I grew up in trees, and now when you are in trees and forests, in Leeds, how is that contrasted with with the different ways?
Oh, I like that question. I'll say first of all that it's being in the woods in Leeds that reactivated the memory of my childhood and made me start to look at the value of it and how much it's deeply formed my interests and my what I'm attracted to. So I have to give thanks for the forests in Leeds, first of all, the woods, and which I started walking in when I moved to live in the neighborhood that I now live in, which is round here. And it's similar in that respect, because it's woods, it's trees, it's the experience of being enclosed in that very vital space with all of the sights and sounds. But it's also different in that the flora is obviously very different to me, so that I'm learning a new space. I'm learning a new flora, and that has been an exciting activity of discovery, of learning the names of trees, which might seem very ordinary and commonplace to a lot of people. But it struck me that, after all, I'm not from here. Um, I've only known the name beach in the last 3 years. Now, I haven't learned the name beach, but I've only learned to identify a beach over the last 2.5 years. A silver birch tree. I'm learning the names of birds, and because that's the wildlife, isn't it? That's the wildlife is a part of the forest, of the woodland, I would say, the woods. I wouldn't call around here woods a forest. I would say the woods. The wildlife is a part of it as well. And you're there, so you begin to learn the names of birds and how to identify them by their bird calls. And I have a poem in the book, which is the second poem, which begins on that note, and which is very honest. Should I go into it?
Yes, that'd be wonderful.
That poem?
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a good point at which to go into the poem.
Persephone could put that one on screen if you'd like that.
Yes, I think that would be helpful to a lot of people.
Okay.
Naming.
Great. Yeah.
Naming. 1. In the wood I hear the beautiful call of a bird I do not know. I wish I knew the names of birds and could identify them by their songs. It would be so much nicer to say, I heard the warble of a wood pigeon as the red floor of the woodland stretched before me like an avenue through the high rises of beeches and oaks. As I walk on the path and feel the soft cushion, feel my foot press down into the flesh of the duff. Because a name is reassurance, a comfort in the flesh to hold these songs in the trees. So something could be mine. Warble, bell, trill, fluting, something nearly right. 2. The urge I feel is to give things names, but everything is already named. The urge I feel is to connect with this land, these plants, birds, songs, these trees. To name things would be perverse. Perhaps the place within will always escape the name. In the mind, one leaves, and leaves, but on stone, earth, and grass, one stays forever. I have a few trees on my tongue: oak, maple, birch. I have a few birds on my tongue: seagull, mallard, redbreast. I have a few plants on my tongue: rhododendron, English ivy, iris. I have started to see that nothing is itself. Everything turns to something else, like birch bark becoming veste de loup. I prefer the sound of my wife's ancestors, the ashes of their throat, like the rhododendron barks becoming fighting pythons, and me gathering chestnuts for dinner in a stream that dips below ground and re-emerges often. This life I no longer know. 3. When I go walking in Malham, there is still that part of me that didn't want to come, that doesn't want to be in this land of Carrimore jackets. All I can handle is nature under fingernails, my grandmother planting Negro yams, shaping the land, All I can handle is the landscape within me, not scenery spread out on a canvas.
Thank you.
That's the poem Naming. I
Thank
absolutely enjoyed writing that poem.
Thank you very much. So you were saying that your family weren't animists, but that you've developed a strong interest in animism. Can you say any more about that, and then perhaps go into a poem that maybe expresses something of that?
Yes. So my parents weren't animists. My grandparents or parents, they weren't. They certainly, I don't even know if they know that name. But what is interesting, however, is that despite the displacement of our ancestors who, as you know, were Africans, captive Africans taken to the Caribbean, including Jamaica. Despite that displacement, there are certain vital things that have remained, that have been residually preserved. And one of those things is a sense of connectivity with the land and with the spirits. And this sense manifests itself in real ways, sometimes in, I would say, throwaway ways, so commonplace as to go unnoticed. People, including my grandmother, actually are very connected to plants and trees for healing, and to knowing what bush to look for, to boil when you have this illness. And the dreams and the spirit life is connected to that, because you will hear somebody say, well, I dream that this is what I need to look for and to boil and whatever. So it's this communication with the spirit world is really key. And the ancestors communicate, people cultivate a relationship with their dead, with being spoken to by their father and mother through dreams and visions and so on. And of course, we have actual Afro-Caribbean spirit practices where I live. You see a lot of them. And in religions or spirit practices like Mayal, and Obia, and in hybrid syncretic practices such as revivalism and Pokumina, which combine the Christian biblical texts and beliefs with the African practices. You do get a lot of the centrality of trees, in which rituals sometimes involve placing food under the tree. I think about the cotton tree, which is a central tree in some of these practices. In the working of Obia, libations and offerings sometimes need to be made. And sometimes you will walk past a cotton tree early in the morning and you will see things remaining there, you know, bottles and bowls of rice or some similar thing. And, you know, there's a lot of mystery surrounding a lot of these, because we dwell in conflict between the Protestant Christianity, which says that you need to turn your back on all of that, and the very real conservation of it that everybody knows that we know that those things are happening. So there is all of that. So when I say that my grandparents weren't animists, I do wanted to bring that in as a kind of caveat, and to say that I think a lot of those spirit wares, the sense of the importance of the natural world in all of that has influenced me. It influences the way I think about the natural world, think about trees, and think about rivers and rocks. And there's such a simpler thing as duppies, which are a duppy is an ancestral spirit. And you hear talk about duppy so much in Jamaica. And they can be harnessed for good or for evil. And they inhabit the night. And as children, the thing that you're most scared of is meeting a duppy so, on a dark road. But they live in trees. They're in the trees. They're in the woodland. That's where they live. And so you're walking and you're seeing the banana leaves and the plantain leaves move. That it evokes human shapes, and you almost you begin to wonder, okay, is it a spirit or is it a tree? And so there's those forms of liminality, to use a fancy word, but it's just, do you know what I mean? This sense of mystery sometimes that we get from our grandparents, and I could go on about that, but I think that's how the trees come in.
Yeah.
The spirit, the animacy, as Robert Macfarlane calls it.
Thank you. Can you read a poem or two that kind of
Sure.
addresses that?
So now I'll read a poem called Among the Great Oaks in Autumn. Oops. I'm sorry. Bear with me. Well, it's on the screen. I shall read it from the screen. Among the great oaks in autumn. Among the oaks, my skin is a type of bark. I give birth to rocks. The same thing that happens to me happens to them. A leaf will flutter down my roots and into another world, turning to ghosts, creeping back as the light goes low. I am painted dancers sprouting from the vines. The strings of my body vibrate to the strings of the rain. Then I shall read another poem, and that will be, well, Daffodils is not one of those poems that brings back. So I think I'll read the poem Finding Space too. Is that all right?
Yeah, great.
I think that one ties in more with, so Finding Space too.
Great, thank you.
Finding Space too. Darkness falling. I am beside the water, tumbling over rocks, a load I do not need to carry. I have gone round the usual circuit, up slope and down road and slope again, walking over fallen leaves, crush, scratch, black pulp, into the cocoon whose membrane has dissolved to skeletal film. Still I walk, smelling the fresh wetness of grass, crisp dampness of the air. There are many dogs I must get past along the way, as always running past or towards me, stepping off the path to give them room. They lick me, they mark me with their paws. How far can I go before I am no longer there? Back home there are cows, goats, and mules in the bush, and humans planting. How far can I go before I am no longer there? This walking is not easy. And now I'm beside the waterfall, inside this cocoon. My feet have grown roots in the meat of brown leaves and earth, falling water drones beside me, awakening Dunn's River falls, and the year I first saw the sea. If only I weren't out of place, how long I would continue my conversation with this form of water. Then I could stay here for hours, looking at its swirl, its thickness, all the waters I had never listened to before, in every direction of time. Over every solid thing, my soul leaps towards a pinch in the stream where eddies converge under a rock. There is my soul. There. I have seen it today.
My soul leaps towards a pinch in the stream. That's so beautiful. Thank you. Oh, so we're going to have a little talk about form now, and it's one of the things that Kind and Kind are particularly interested in, because since we've been working with eco poetry and running these workshops, we've found that it's necessary to be very open-minded about form. And one of the, if you could call it a form that we use, is to collaborate, and to not just ourselves, but in a group of people, all participants, any number collaborating. You know, we've often allowed, or I say allowed, gosh, the breaking down of grammar or syntax, and we've used hybrid forms such as the Old Norse, it's very hard to say this word, a Forni Roislug, which is a broken backed form, to talk about extractivism and eididux. And we invented the vertical threnody, which was a long, thin elegiac form when we were doing a workshop on Aldeburgh Beach, thinking about the sea and the ruination of the sea, actually. And so I was thinking about, there are distinct formal challenges in writing what you might call eco poetry, and involving a surrender of sorts. And I wondered, we've sort of thought about some of the formal things that are going on in your work, and I can list a few of them, but it'd be really good if you could say what you think is really significant. So I've thought about the Caribbean irony, which you have mentioned before. The idea of conversation between poets, references to Wordsworth, but not only that, there are silent conversations going on as well, perhaps with Camo Brathwaite, and you've mentioned a poet, Anthony McNeill. We introduced that him to us the other day. And between lands and peoples, and between self and past self. Also performance, question of sound and orality. So it may be that you want to pick one of those to talk a little bit about.
Yes, might not be able to deal with that. Is this timed? What's the time frame that we've got left? We're
going to 7:45.
Okay.
So we've got 25 minutes.
Yes, we do have some time left. So yes, so thank you so much for picking those up, and it's a lot to think, to talk about. I will begin perhaps by seeing you've mentioned Wordsworth. He's one of the poets that I dialogue with in this collection, particularly in the poem Daffodils, and also in For Those Who Can Afford Time. And already I've seen where somebody has described my work as Wordsworthian, and that's a compliment, of course, but I was keen to, so I knew I was in dialogue with a poet like Wordsworth because of what I'm writing about, because of where I am writing, and so on. But at the same time, I was keen to write against Wordsworth. So I'm in tradition, but within that tradition, I'm trying to rethink it, to change the question, to ask new questions in this field of nature writing or eco-poetry or whatever it's called. And so I think, you know, it's really very important to me that I don't imitate and just absorb a 19th century romantic sound to talk about what I'm talking about. That's just really key, that I carve out my own space, but not just, you know, it's not just about me. It's really thinking about how do I do justice to the lives and experiences that I'm writing about, including my own, of course, okay? And I write about the disturbances, if you will, of race and class and all of the, and certain intersections of those as they manifest themselves in green spaces and in the outdoors. And you've already talked about the Black outdoors, which is just a nice term to capture all of that. So in referring to engaging with Wordsworth, I'm conscious of language, and I'm always conscious of how can I bend the language, how can I make it sound different. A part of that is using, first of all, vernacular in some poems. So that will send a British reader who's familiar with this landscape to a different place. It will defamiliarize them. And then that's important. Another thing is the flora and the names that keep coming back. So language, I suppose, insofar as it's part of form, but more visual formalistic effects would be the use of, and before I go to that, we spoke about the conversations with Caribbean poets as well, you know, Kamal Brathwaite being, you know, there's a dialogue with him in Theorizing Dog Walking 1. There is a conversation with Malaika Booker in one of the final poems, Do You Feel Them Looking at You? There is that conversation that we discussed with Anthony McNeil, whom recently I've just realized how deeply I can hear his voice in, I can see the aesthetic as well in Crossing the Threshold. And he's not a well-known poet outside of, he's not even well-known in Jamaica, to be honest. Died in 1996, a prolific modernist poet. And what I think I get from him is the coupling, so the use of couplets, which is not obviously not distinctive to him, but what his line breaks and the way the meaning hinges on the line break, and the way that those breaks allow you multiple significations. So it allows you to, so that each line resonates with the other in kind of multiple ways. I studied him, I think, I didn't, not consciously, but for that kind of creation of that kind of resonance, that multiplicity. And I don't know what obviously what an external reader would say, but I feel that I see it coming out there, and I wasn't conscious of it when I was. So that's one aspect of form. And then you realize that I do use quite a bit of, I do use spaces quite a lot. I don't use punctuation in any, in fact, I think there's only one, there are probably 2 poems in the entire collection that are punctuated. The spaces do all of that work for me. It was important, I think, as a kind of process of creating air and space and allowing lexical bits, allowing phrases to breathe and echo and chime is what, this is what, at least this is what I'm experimenting with.
Mhm.
I think punctuation becomes a shackle sometimes for me in doing that. So I use space to create the breaks and the transitions and the ruptures and that sort of thing, and to guide whatever meaning or, yeah. So I think that's a formalistic concern, which I haven't, I mean, I can't always give an eloquent answer, but somehow I know it was important to me to do away with punctuation. So that's another formalistic concern. And you know, there are others. I think one form thing about form in this book is that I am pushing the limits sometimes of what poetry is supposed to be. But I have a series of poems called essays, right? And even there are other poems that are treading on the essay ground, and self-consciously so, because I'm asking, okay, how far can this go before it's no longer a poem or something like that,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
It's kind of something that I wanted to do for myself, but because I genuinely believe that one can be critical through poetry, that poetry can be a critical language. And that was something that I consciously explored. And so when you name the poem an essay, you kind of, I mean, you're doing a few things, right? You're being self-conscious. It's sort of like you kind of a disclaimer or you already put it out there. Anyway, I should wrap this up. But yeah, I do that kind of thing as well. And I probably should read Daffodils,
Yes,
which
thank you.
is Daffodils. Is that one going up on the screen, or it's probably not available?
Stephanie, we've
on the
got it.
screen?
I'm quite happy to watch you read it, though.
Oh,
That's
it's coming. Okay.
That's fine. That's fine. Daffodils. Speculation on future blackness. It's time to write about daffodils again, to hear a different sound from the word daffodil. Imagine daffodils in the corner of a sound system in Clapham. Can't you? Well, you must try to imagine daffodils in the hands of a black family on a black walk in spring. The again to hear, I think a lot of readers will recognize that it's from Tinton Abbey. Again to hear, you know, the first line that talks about, I can't quote it, but he goes back to the place again to hear the forever the bells or whatever. So that's a kind of gesture as well, to an overt gesture, to a kind of cheeky overt gesture to Wordsworth. And the poem is about this, how to hear daffodils differently. What is the sound of the word daffodil opens up immediately a cultural landscape. and imaginary. It's such an iconic poem that is I wandered lonely as a cloud, and we learn it too in the tropics at school. That's another story. But we don't have any daffodils over there. They don't grow in the tropics. But I just wanted to simply, the question is there. A question for me as much as for anybody else. Why can't I imagine, when I hear the daffodil and imagine the children holding it, why can't I imagine, you know, a black hands, or, you know, a black family on a, why can't I imagine the daffodils in the hands of a black family? So, you know, it's this question about the visuality and challenging the representation. Yeah, so.
Thank you. So I was wondering if perhaps to read the rest of the poems you're going to read, so that we've got time for some questions at the end.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Okay. I think there are only.
Sorry.
I think there are only two.
Yes.
One, is it one more? Those who can afford time.
Is it,
Those
yes.
who can afford time. Yeah.
Yes.
That's the last one. So I'll read that now.
Okay, and there was one more actually we thought we might end with, all of a sudden, which
okay.
Yeah.
Those who can afford time. Who wanders lonely as a cloud with 3 golden retrievers? Not me. No, not me. I could never understand this poetry, never understand what the poem was saying and how this could be poetry for me when my English teacher drilled the imagination of a white man's country. Didn't know how, but somehow I knew this wandering was not for me because ours was not the same kind of time, or wandering never so accidental, not so entire, so free. As if nothing was coming, as if no hawk was near, as if they owned the land and the mansion on it, as if tomorrow and forever was theirs, as if they had the right to take their time because everything about them so refined, so secure, so clean. So Wordsworth's poem never made sense. I'd never stopped to listen to the poems about trees and mushrooms and odd cute things and birds whose names I could never pronounce. My poetry was Tom the village DJ, more material, I said, than the woods, than the lives of those who loafed and bought their time with money, I thought, those who had all the time in the world.
Thank you. Sorry, the page was missing there. And would you be able to read All of a Sudden? I'm not sure if it's in our PowerPoint. Yes, here it is.
All of a sudden. All of a sudden. It may be easier to define walking based on what it is not. Seeing your body through the eyes of an other, standing outside yourself, watching self. I was going somewhere. I was on my way. I never allowed my body to occupy space the way these people do. Walking did not exist. Perhaps it didn't need to. Perhaps walking is pressing one's weight onto things. Perhaps to not walk is to make things breathe in the depth of their silence. But perhaps walking is breathing different, with power and blossoms and breeze. I went somewhere to collect the breadfruit, buy a big gill of oil, 3 pounds of flour. I carried partner money, but Tikya you go a river, mine you drown, you want me murder your chicken, Mary Hawk the near. It may be easier to define walking based on what it is not, always going, always hurrying, always time short, always chicken Mary, we don't have time to waste, Hawk the near. Now I am walking, I am not going.
Thank you. And if people remember, I am walking, I am not going is the beginning of the first poem we heard, Crossing the Threshold. And we really have crossed the threshold with you, Jason, of understanding or the beginnings of understanding a different perspective. And we're really grateful to you for that.
It's been an honor. I really have appreciated your inviting me in the space that you've created. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we'd love people to ask Jason a question if they would like to. Persephone is just putting up Jason's collection of trees. Can you see on the chat? So anybody out there would like to ask a question? Here, Jethro and Olivia, would you like to go ahead? Can they go ahead, Persephone?
I'm just trying to find, yeah, Jethro, if you want to speak, I'm just trying to find you. Here we go, allowed to talk. You can speak if you want, or you can type it into the box.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful poetry and discussion. Thank you so much, Jason, and also Kay and Claire. As Kay knows very well, we live in a forest in the mountains in Italy, in an area that was very carefully tended. And I think there were so many echoes of your grandparents' experience of forest gardens and forestry and agroforestry and living off the trees and the land, very subsistence, but very connected. People did a lot of collecting of medicinal herbs, and they knew every plant and tree. And then, you know, following the Second World War, there was a big demographic out-migration. The road came and the people left. And there was a huge transition, and all the people who made charcoal and raised animals and collected chestnuts to grind into flour and to make olive oil, make olives to make olive oil. We live in a time now when it's the grandparents in their 80s and 90s who actually grew up that way and lived that way.
Also helping each other out.
Also helping each other out, much like you described these work days. There was no cash. Everything was, and people lost track of who, you know, who owed who what. Everybody did things for everybody. And my question is, you know, now, okay, so the grandparents are still here. They're aging. They're in their 80s and 90s. They were the farmers and charcoal makers, and they had these forest gardens. The whole hillside now, the whole mountain is abandoned and rewilding. And there's a kind of a paradox, which is that the people who tended the forest are no longer able to, and now the rewilding is phenomenal. And in some ways you just can't believe the birds and the bird song and the animals and the, you know, deer, foxes, wolves, badgers, and all the trees that are coming up that used to be no longer permitted because there were only certain trees that were cultivated, beech and chestnut. And at the same, so there's a paradox that there's been, you know, the land is no longer sort of connected to in this way because that generation is gone, and the children and grandchildren have jobs in the city, you know, they're educated and they have different lives. And so what happens in that relationship? That's the paradox I'm interested in, that you have this explosion of wildlife and rewilding and so on, but you also have a kind of a disconnection of the human element from that. And what we do get is people who are walking without going. We do have that. There are a lot of people who come just to enjoy. We have people who look for mushrooms, and we have hunters, and a few people who cut roads into the hill, and pilgrims, and we have pilgrims. But what happens in that? Has that shift happened in Jamaica? Have you witnessed that? And what is that change about? That change in that relationship between us and the forest?
First of all, so this you live near this area that you're
We
describing?
live in it, in the middle of it.
Oh,
Yes.
okay.
We're right in
Okay.
the, you use the word liminal, and that's the way I feel, because we're on the edge of this vast wilderness and this very small village full of people, mostly in their 80s and 90s. And then down in the city are the children and grandchildren.
Yeah. There have been various forms of, I can't think of anything comparable that has taken place in Jamaica, any experiences of any rewilding. But I mean, I fully appreciate what you're describing there. It's quite interesting. You know, and it makes us think about, acknowledge the fact that this business about being in nature is not necessarily a romanticist fantasy of something that is beyond us or idealized, but that what nature is really is a dual relationship, or certainly what it is for where where the people, my people, it's a dual relationship of dependency, mutual dependency. The land, you shape the land as much as the land shapes you. It's quite, you know, it goes two ways. So there's that. I mean, mostly what happens to these sorts of villages in Jamaica, when they aren't able to, when the bauxite companies don't leave them be, which is what happened in early 2000s when the bauxite industry in Jamaica crashed because they couldn't come to certain agreements with the government and what have you, and the mostly Canadian companies pulled out, and you know, you had all sorts of changes. But at that point, they were about to come into my grandmother's village and buy everybody out, buy out all of their land and rehouse them in some other district far away, which they had already finished mining. And they left the huge cavity and uncultivable land now, where they send these people to while they begin to mine out their district. And that's a lot of that happens in the bauxite industry in Jamaica. You'll find in the countryside these mammoth cavities, and if there's any wilding, that's it. It's just land that is no longer usable.
Okay, we're going to have to
Yeah.
start to wind down.
Yeah.
Jason, I have found this poem that I'd like to read to you. It's from Lu Che, and his dates are 969 to 127 AD. So it's a very, very early Chinese poem. And something about your writing about time, which makes me see time differently, and which your collection has really made me think about time and your presence in such a different way. I think this is just a lovely kind of, it almost connects everything. So it's very, very old poem. Show me the insides of a tree. Let its flesh tell me a story of history, weather, tree time, that slow time witness.
Yeah.
I thought that was a lovely bringing together.
Yeah. What was the name of the poet again?
Lu Chai. So it's LUCH''AI.
Brilliant.
So that's a lovely way to draw it all together, and to we could talk with you, Jason, for many hours. It's horrible to have to fit it into an hour and a quarter. So I want to just talk quickly about the next in the series, but first of all, to thank you so much, Jason, for it's such a wonderful introduction to your work, and I'm sure a lot of people will now be able to read the book with such a enhanced insight. Beautiful. Thank you so much. Very generous of you, the way you've talked about it. Thank you. So the next in the series, this time we're going to have a workshop on Tuesday, the 5th of October, 6:30 to 8:30, to give people who are listening now perhaps a chance to participate with an online reading and responding workshop, bringing attention to a range of eco-poets from, for example, the native nations of America, such as Natalie Diaz, Susie Delgado from Paraguay, and from the First Peoples of Australia. So although we won't have those people actually in the Zoom room, we will be addressing their work and talking with you. So that's Tuesday, the 5th of October, 6:30. We'll be putting out an invitation on Eventbrite eventually. Okay, so we've come to the end, and all that remains is thank you everybody for listening. Thank you again, Jason. Thank you, ONCA and Persephone.
Friends, there is a really quite an important question from Vera, I think.
Okay.
Asking about UK poets exploring it. Shall I read it? I don't want to leave it hanging there because it feels like a necessary question.
Yeah.
But it may be, I don't know. Would you like to read it aloud, Jason, or would you like me to read it to you?
Let's see, I'll find it.
It's
okay.
Vera saying,
it's a beautiful. Thank you, Vera, for that. I wonder if with increased awareness of racism and exclusion, many aspects of our lives, including natural spaces, you see. Both as a poet and a lecturer, more young poets of minoritized backgrounds, especially of Black and Brown heritage, exploring their relationship with nature in a UK context. I'm aware of Black and Brown, absolutely. I'm aware of some names I could call. Unfortunately, I can't think of a lot of young necessarily, but I think of Zakia McKenzie is one younger, she's certainly younger than I am, poet I think about who's doing that. She's of Jamaican descent, interestingly, as well. I might mainly know people like Mona Ashi, who are, not so young like myself. Yeah, it's. I think there's need for a lot more, and perhaps there are some that I don't know of.
We're researching this as well, and Vera will get in touch with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
great,
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Okay. Right. Thank you
Bye-bye.
very much, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
thanks,
Bye.
Jason.
Bye.
Thanks, Claire. Thanks, Kay. Thanks all.